Our team is Josh Biggs, Val Nugent, Lauren McCormick, and Kari Maldonado Grisby for our dual enrollment English 12 class. For our video, we will be going over a grammar rule topic, which is subject-verb agreement. Subject-verb agreement is the grammar rule that states that the subject of the sentence has to agree with the number of the main verb. What this means is that when the subject has a singular meaning, the verb has to agree with it in number. If the subject and the verb do not take the same number, the sentence would most likely sound very wrong. An example of the subject and verb not taking the same number would be, the dog are not eating his food. The subject-verb agreement mainly applies to the present tense. Subject-verb agreement does not need to be applied in past tense, as most of the time the verb is used in the same way for both plural and singular subjects. This is exemplified in the example shown on the slide. Blue represents a singular verb, and green represents a plural verb. In present tense, you can see the verb changes when the subject swaps from singular to plural, but in the past tense sentence, the verb does not change when the subject swaps from singular to plural. Before we start figuring out how to apply subject-verb agreement to our sentences, we need to figure out how to identify a subject as either singular or plural. A singular subject is defined as one entity, whether it be one person or one group. Examples shown in the slide of singular subjects are he, she, it, someone, everybody, anything, another, and one. A plural subject is defined as multiple entities, which is more than one. Usually for plural subjects, all you really have to do is add an s or es, if it is common objects such as box to boxes. Examples of plural subjects are they, blank and blank, both, others, several, many, and the students. Now, there are some subjects that can be either singular or plural. This occurs in many subjects changing. Now, there are some subjects that can either be singular or plural. This occurs in multiple subjects changing whether or not they have a singular meaning or a plural meaning. One example is statistics, which can either be represented as a school subject with a singular meaning or as a set of data with a plural meaning. Other examples of singular or plural subjects are none, any, most, all, blank or blank, and statistics.
Now we're going to look at plural but singular subjects. These type of subjects are subjects that seem and look plural, but are in actuality a singular subject. These subjects are plural, but have singular meaning. A prime example of this is mathematics. Mathematics may seem like a plural subject due to there being an S at the end of it, but mathematics is an academic subject, which is a singular entity. Therefore, it is a singular subject. So when mathematics is used in a sentence, such as mathematics is a boring class, the verb has to be singular. Other examples of these types of words are news, politics, and measles. Collective nouns are words that, when defined, seem like they should be plural, such as crowd, which is a huge group of people, which is more than one person. But a crowd is one entity, since it is one group of people, therefore it has to be used as a singular subject. Other words like crowd are words known as collective nouns. Other examples of these are everybody, everyone, crowd, anything, and family. A word that is a plural but singular subject is statistics. Statistics is an interesting subject, and everybody walks around the track. But statistics can be changed, however, in this word. The statistics show that this computer is faster. It is statistics with a plural meaning, since it's a multiple amount of data as compared to the singular subject when it is only referencing to an academic subject. Now that we know how to identify a subject as either singular or plural, we now have to figure out the number of the verb. The first thing, obviously, is to figure out is whether or not the subject is singular or plural. Once you find out whether the subject is singular or plural, you have to use the correct version of the verb you are using in the sentence to pair with the subject. For a majority of action verbs, if the subject is in the sentence is singular, all you need to do is add an s at the end of the verb. For example, he, which is a singular subject, bikes to the park. Notice how there's an s at the end of the verb bike in order to pair with the subject. If the subject is plural, however, you do not need an s. You just need to leave the verb as it is. For example, they, which is a plural subject, bike. Notice how there is no s to in that verb, to the park. They bike to the park.
We just talked about how to figure out the number of verb and mainly focused on only action verbs. Now we're going to look at We just talked about how to figure out the number of verb and mainly focused on action verb. Now we're going to look at being verbs such as has, is, and was. For this, we're going to use the 1s rule where there can only be a maximum of 1s in either the subject or the verb. There are expectations to the rule, however, such as the word mathematics. The singular version of these verbs are has, is, was, and the plural version of these being verbs are have, are, and were. When you have a singular subject, you keep the being. The singular version of these being verbs are has, is, and was. The plural version of these being verbs are have, are, and were. When you have a singular subject, you keep the being verb with the s, such as has. And if you have a plural subject, you use the being verb without the s, such as have. An example with a singular subject is she has. Notice the s, the ball. She has the ball. An example with a plural subject is the boys have. Notice how there is no s. The ball. The boys have the ball. We are going to now talk about sentences with prepositional phrases. The reason we are going to talk about this is because a sentence with a prepositional phrase can confuse people and make them think that other sets of rules have to be put in place around the prepositional phrase, which is simply not true. The same exact rules apply to a sentence with a prepositional phrase as compared to a sentence without a prepositional phrase. If the sentence has a prepositional phrase between the subject and the verb still has to agree with the subject. Our first example is, the box filled with books is extremely heavy. The underlying verb The underlying portion of the sentence is the prepositional phrase that is placed between the subject and the verb. When figuring out whether the subject is a singular or plural, completely ignore the prepositional phrase is even there. The box is singular is a subject, therefore we will use the singular version of the is verb. The second example, the cars on the parking lot roof are all fancy. The car is a plural subject, therefore we will use the cars is a plural subject, therefore we will use the plural version of the is verb, which is are. The cars are all fancy on the cars. The cars are all fancy, and the cars on the parking lot roof are all fancy. Still use the same exact subject-verb agreement rules.
We're now going to look at examples of verb with their singular and plural versions. The first three verbs we will be looking at are all being verbs. On the left is if the subject has a singular meaning, and on the right is if the subject has a plural meaning. The first verb is, which is a singular version. The plural version of is are. I'm now going to list back and forth the singular and plural versions of each of these examples. Is, are, has, have, was, were, learns, learn, throws, throw, plays, play, sleeps, sleep. If you notice a verb on this list is was, which is an exception to the rule of subject-verb agreement, only being in the present as it is describing something happening in the past tense. He was good at math, and they were bad at math. The sentence describes people who used to be bad at math. We're now going to go over the subject-verb agreement rules. The first rule is stated multiple times with the verb was being an exception. Subject-verb agreement applies only to the present tense. The second rule is the once rule, as there can only be a maximum of one S at the end of in either the subject or the verb in a sentence. Students is a plural subject that would use a verb that does not have an S at the end of it. Student is a singular subject that would use a verb and does have an S at the end of it. The third rule mainly goes over the subject of blank or blank. The subject can either be singular or plural depending on what is closest to the verb. An example of this is the mechanic or the engineers are always late. The mechanic or the engineers is all one subject with many subjects within it. The first many subjects is the mechanic, which is a singular subject, and the other many subject is the engineers, which is a plural subject. Since the engineers is a plural subject and is the closest to the verb, we would use the plural version of the verb is. If the mechanics was closest to the verb, then we would use the singular version of the verb is. For example, the engineers or the mechanic is always late.
Alright, so today we'll be looking at on this slide we'll be looking at some examples of the verb being used or a subject-verb agreement being put in use for various sentences. The first sentence we'll be looking at is the mailman blank the mail in the mailbox. As you can see, the mailman is a singular subject, so we'll be using a singular version of the verb put. Now, using the 1S rule, we can determine that the verb singular version would be puts, since the mailman does not have an S at the end of it. So we'll be picking the verb puts. So the verb, or the sentence, is now the mailman puts the mail in the mailbox. The second example we're looking at is the employees blank up the store. The employees is a plural subject. So we'll be using the verb close. The employees close up the store. The third sentence we're looking at is the teacher or the students are going to go to lunch. Now this is a prime example we discussed earlier. The subject that is closest to the verb is the students, and the students is a plural subject, so we're using a plural version of the verb is. So we're going to use the verb are. The teacher or the students are going to go to lunch. The last example is Wayne and Garth blank up their hockey nets on the road. Now, Wayne and Garth is a plural subject, as it is using and blank. So we will be picking set. Since it's plural, we will be using set, which is the plural version of the verb set. And that is subject-verb agreement. Hope you learned something.